You guys, I know how it is. I've been in relationships where the first year it's spicy, and then after that, it's like, what happens? It's like the spice goes away, the connection's not there. And you wonder, do I get bored with everyone? What if that's not true? What if I have the answer for you? See you there. Welcome to the Life in Red podcast. This is a way of life that emphasizes positive sexuality, self-love, and confidence. On this journey, red is now your new color. Be courageous. Be passionate. Be sexy. And never stop living your best red life. So now I have one question for you. Are you ready to live your life in red? To join us on this journey, like and subscribe below. Welcome to the Life in Red podcast. I'm Brittany, your host, and today I am so excited because we are going to address how humor and sexy time can come together and make things explode. And I have just the guy who is going to explain to us a little bit how this works. So I want to introduce an amazing therapist who loves helping people in so many different ways, like many therapists do. We had Michel Bordeau. Welcome. I had to do it that way to say it right.
No, yeah, it works. It works. I hear so many variations of my name. The most common one in the U.S. is Michel Bordeau. So I'm used to it. I'll take Michel Bordeau. I'm pretty happy with it, so.
Okay, for you lazy people out there, Michel Bordeau.
Michel Bordeau,
Okay. Yes. Well, Michelle, how did you get into the line of therapy and I know that sexuality pops up in all different areas in which you do dealing with trauma, and that's what fascinated. We got into this beautiful conversation, how sex shows up everywhere, even if sexuality is not your field of study in particular. What got you into helping people?
So therapy was not my first career. I was a university lecturer first, then I was an academic counselor, and then I became a therapist because as an academic counselor, oftentimes I was at University of Michigan at the time, so I was expected to assess students to see if they needed psychological services, and I always wanted to be on the other side of the road. I wanted to be continuing the conversation with the students, because I would have students who display symptoms of bulimia, anorexia, who were on the spectrum and all that stuff. And so I wanted to figure it out. So at one point, after about 9 years as an academic counselor, I decided I need to make the jump, professionally.
Yeah.
But it was also coincided with a time where I started to look into myself. I was entering my 40s, and men when our testosterone levels are dropping. Some of us are fortunate enough to start thinking about these things. I was forced to thinking about these things because of a divorce. Sort of like doing the therapy after the divorce, not before the divorce, as a sort of self-reflection piece. And in the process of doing these therapies, I realized that I had a lot of issues coming from sexual trauma in childhood, for instance, physical abuse also in childhood. So the more I explore this, the more I realize this is what I want to do. I've always been the sort of person people reach out to me and talk to me about their emotional concerns, their life concerns, and the two just connected very well. And from the get-go, I wanted to work with people on the spectrum and their families, like high functioning individual on the spectrum, which is my area as a specialty. But it comes with a lot of comorbidity like ADHD, anxiety, OCD, bulimia, anorexia,
Wow.
the whole field, and now that we're discovering that there are actually more women who identify women who are on the spectrum than men, the field is very interesting. I'm getting an influx of new clients. But I work mostly with adults on the spectrum, like older teens and adults on the spectrum, and I work also with their parents, so it's
That's
sort of
so
like a complete package, yeah.
Well, and that's a package I can get behind. I mean, so I think I had to. No, I'm a 15-year-old young man inside. But yeah, that is so beautiful that you turned your own pain into purpose. And it's like we're trying to come, it's all the way up to our 40s. We're all trying to figure out, what are we here for? What are we here to do? And yours just made a baby, and here you are helping people on the spectrum. And I mean, just you and I have had some beautiful conversations about eating disorders and everything, and how it's linked to trauma and sexuality. And it blew my mind. It was like a mind orgasm of information I've never heard. So then you went on and started telling me about how humor can help soften things. So we let that wall down and get a little spicy. And I was like, oh my gosh, I would want to hear about this. So I know they want to. So let's go into, laughing is so healing. Laughter is healing for many chemical reasons to get us out of our patterns. But can you tell me a little bit about the story of how laughter in a sexual experience let that guard down?
Mhm. Well, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I'm going to
Yeah,
talk
let's go for it.
about so I started by mentioning, and during my 40s, there's a journey of self-discovery.
Right.
And then with all the self-discovery, there's self-actualization and there's self-deprecation. But learning to realize that we have shortcomings is entering the space of, being humorous about who we are, and self-deprecation in every aspect of life, and in the way we do relationship, and the way we do intimacy, and the way we are with people is a good start, because it's just a form of a mirror. Humor about ourselves is kind of a mirror. I mean, it serves many functions. It's a defense mechanism, it's an avoidance mechanism, but it can also,
Yeah.
it can also be very, very helpful. And certainly, if someone, for instance, has experienced sexual trauma in childhood or in their teenage years, that still has an imprint on their experiences with sexuality, that is still deep in their psychic self, and they have yet to work on it. Humor in these moments is very important. I mean, I think if you use some examples, personal examples, I don't have to go into the lives of some of my former clients. By the way, if I talk about anyone, it's going to be only former clients, and I will change names, I will change circumstances. I will make sure to respect and protect them. But I can start with myself if you want to, because I do have moments in my life, I call them moments of personal mythology, that helped me recover from childhood sexual abuse, because I've had to have these pivotal moments to look at myself and to understand myself a lot more.
Right.
But I mean, we can start with examples of that nature if you want to.
I know she said childhood sexual abuse, and we were talking about yesterday how abuse, and this is a little off topic, but I feel led to go here. How abuse, just quickly, can show up in ways that we wouldn't suspect. It's not always being molested. It's not always these different ways. And when I heard this from you, I realized I myself had a form of sexual abuse that I've been carrying into the bedroom. And so I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you some example, but I want to make sure I'm not giving the impression that I'm going to judge an entire generation, although I'm going to frame it from a general standpoint. I am 54 years old in July, but I grew up in the 70s, and in Europe, where our concept of sexuality, certainly in science, is very different. Nudity is not sexuality. Nudity is not sexuality. Okay? So this is a premise. So if my parents are walking around naked growing up, it's not sexuality. It's my parents being naked. So that in itself cannot be traumatic because culturally it's absolutely acceptable. You know?
So cultural effects, how you were raised and how you perceive and believe things, that's going to be the varying degree of this.
Yes. And then, so right there, like for instance, if I grew up in the United States, in the South, in an extremely religious family, like having my parents walking around naked might have opened a completely different conversation. But in France, it's a neutral. Nakedness is neutrality. But my father had a tendency to kind of worship his own male genitalia because he was a very tall gentleman, very skinny. I don't know if he deserved the word gentleman, but very tall, very skinny, and very well endowed. He had the male organ of a porn star, basically.
He was hung. Yeah,
absolutely, and he would talk about it nonstop. Like the guy died when he was 62 years old of chain smoking. But I know that the last conversation I had with him was about his penis. And not only did he do this, but when I was a kid, he would mock me. Like right now, just thinking about it, my spinal cord just sent me a signal. Like he would mock the size of the undeveloped child, male organ. And we would look at pictures as a kid, and he would make fun of my baby genitalia. It was constant, but it was constant talking. My dad, there was not a single day my dad did not talk about his oversized male genitalia, constantly. So
that was his power. Yeah,
that was his power. And sexuality was talked about quite openly, even with my mother. She never stopped him on that subject matter. So hearing it as a kid, I start to form who I am. I start to understand who I am. And I was always thinking when you look in that direction, which you do it frequently as a boy and as a teenager and as a young man, I always assumed, which is body dysmorphia, that it was undersized. And I was extremely anxious about it. I didn't want to I didn't want to shower with people. My first sexual relationship was in my late teen, 19 years old, which is very unusual in my generation at my age. I did not even self-pleasure until I was 21 years old. I wanted to cut my penis when I was about 11 years old. All of these, and people will ask, this is part of body dysmorphia. Why are you sort of obsessive and compulsive and focusing on this perceived defect? Because no doctor would say this, none whatsoever. It's just because as a form of sexual abuse, if someone continuously sends you this information, which is a false information, you internalize it as a kid.
Well, yes, it sets this standard for what you believe in about yourself, and you don't have anything to compare it to. You're like, you have like Godzilla over here who's hung like a horse, and you're 3 years old. With all due respect, Dad.
No, don't. He doesn't deserve it. He has not earned it.
Never mind. But, so it's just crazy to me when I hear this. I'm like, okay, let's say you're 3-4 years old, and it's like, look how big mine is. And then, but our parents, like I have to say with my parents, everything they taught me, we are blank pages to a certain respect. Genetically we carry things, but we're blank pages, and they're writing the book on our identities. And you hear, that your male genitalia is, tiny, and that carried with you. And it's fascinating. And it's so, I can't imagine what you went through. That's nuts.
And so, I have long recovered, but in order to recover, you go through a whole process of kind of excessive reassurance. You want people to tell you, which is really weird because it's kind of symptomatic of a lot of men who just want, I have the biggest thing. But me, it was literally because I wanted to know.
You wanted evidence.
And even measurement, there was disbelief in measurement and all that stuff. But what's
Oh,
very important about this, first, there's not a single touch. I was never touched a single time, except
right.
that my soul and my mind were
Mm.
engraved. They were more than touched. They were for the longest time. They were just permanently reprogrammed. But there's some humorous moments that happen later in life that allow me to realize, all right, this is dysmorphia. This is a false belief. And then, for instance, I mean, there are stories that don't necessarily relate to me, but my friend Jean-Philippe, I grew up this amazing guy who now has a nonprofit where he built schools in Vietnam, like a great, fabulous guy. But
Cool.
he used to tell this story where he is himself, and this is where the influence of a parent is so important in that case, in case of sexual abuse that is verbal in a way. He's at a dinner with family, and when you're a French kid growing up, you don't sit at the table with your parents in the 70s. You have your special little table. You have
Oh,
kids at
well,
a table, and the older kids help the younger kids. That's what we used to do. But the parents are talking, they're having conversation, and he's about 5 or 6 years old, and they're talking about sex because French people do talk about sex at the table. And then there's an awkward silence form, and there's a silence in the conversation. And then Jean-Philippe erupted and he said, "My daddy has a giant." He celebrated it. He was like, "Yes." And,
it's so
and
big.
and then he was laughing about it.
That's
And
so
I was
awesome.
like, when he told me that story, I'm like, oh my God, this
The
is
yeah.
yeah, it's the
Oh,
opposite. It's like it shattered my mind. I'm like, okay, I need to do some reconsiderations. It's like, because everybody laughed about it. He laughed about it. He had no body dysmorphic issues about it. Like, it begins for me to create insight and belief that there are other things to worry about.
that's 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 the thing is there. Yes, and I think we all get these moments where we have patterns and beliefs we're stuck in that are hurting us so bad. We get that evidence or that paradigm shift that we needed that was profoundly highlighted for us, and you got that moment.
Well, the second one, are you ready? So
Yes.
I came to America, I started my education here, and then, because at the time we had to do mandatory military service, I had to go back to France. And I wanted to not do the military service. I wanted to come back to America and continue my education, my university education.
Right.
And my best friend and I, we had a bet. We were trying to find a way to get kicked out. And then I mean, I'm not going to go into details, but I used this body dysmorphic issue to get kicked out. I told the psychiatrist at the hospital, at the military hospital, that I had a very, very tiny male organ, and people were making fun of me, which they didn't. So the guy had to check me, and
What?
yes, he said,
Based on what? It's all
no, because
perspective.
I was trying to get kicked out on grounds of mental psychiatric instability or something
How
like that.
smart are you?
Okay,
I
but
would have
I
just
didn't know what I was doing. And he looked at it and he's like, "No, you don't." Or, it was very, very French. And you're like, "No, you don't." But they probably diagnosed me with body dysmorphia and then just anxiety and all sorts of things. And then I was kicked out.
Yeah.
I was kicked out. But it was like, this is another personal mythology moment where I'm like, I am restructuring the thinking. I'm reclaiming the thinking. The thinking was imprinted by my father when I'm early in life, but I'm reclaiming it, and I'm reclaiming it with humor, because self-deprecation, which is kind of the highest form of defense mechanism, has always been one that's very strong in me. And anytime I face a situation, I reassess and try to laugh about the situation to see if I can transform the laughter into a new territory, a new sense of self.
So that's just like I was doing reassociation with pleasure and pain. So I was using sex actually, and something that would be very painful, make that a fantasy that's played with but reassociate it with pleasure. It's like that kind of thing to rewrite the story around not good enough.
You reclaim, and
Right.
you create all these milestones, which, I urge you for the listeners, for instance, if they have experienced body dysmorphia, they feel like, they have questioned their sexuality, they have hesitation, they're too much in their heads in terms of their sexuality. If they have evolved, if they have improved, I urge them to journal and then think back of these turning point moments, whether it was with humor or something else, where it allowed them to reclaim that, like everything about sexuality now is my own. My father, his narrative is all gone. I rewrote the book, like I started by erasing some pages, and then the book is mine, and I'm so strong and solid.
Got your power back.
Yes.
You're like, I'm hung my way.
Yeah. That sounds like a great title for a book. I'm hung my way.
Yeah.
Body dysmorphia and traumatic childhood sexuality, something.
Yes, you mentioned childhood sexuality, but I'm hung my way. There's something about that seems so naughty.
I love it. Yes.
I know, yeah. Oh my goodness. So this is crazy. And I think it's so cool in the best of ways that you got new evidence to reclaim your power over a circumstance that is not what I would consider the stereotypical sexual trauma. Hold on, my quotes are out of the screen.
And I don't know the numbers, but there's a lot of sexual trauma that's non-physical. There's a lot. Certainly when some religious orders or religious, dogma have this sort of overemphasis on sexuality, that is extremely clear. I mean, I have seen it in my caseload with a lot of my clients,
Right, and I can relate to this personally. I know you as the viewers don't know me very well yet, but like body dysmorphia, from my past charismatic Pentecostal. So I won't go into all of that, but very, like, even thinking about sex, I would go, please forgive me, I sinned. Just thinking about being attracted to someone, any sexual energy, please forgive me, please forgive me. Like, I had so much shame around it. And my body, my mother, we didn't, around like, when you started your cycle, we didn't talk about the girly area. I was never shown how to examine that and deal with it as a child. It was shame. Like, no, we don't talk about it. You're just going to have to go figure it out. So because of that, I had shame around sexually, people going downtown on me, anything like that. I was like, it's gross. It's nasty. It's like, no, like you don't. So those kind of things really carried with me that my girl, there was something wrong with my girl, just because maybe my mother didn't want to show me how to apply, the feminine products.
Yeah. So here you have a good example, because in my case, it was too much talking on the part of my dad. And then on the part of your mom, it's too little talking, And I mean, it's just so that can have an impact, it really can have an impact during those formative years where we have to discover it. I've had clients who told me that, they were not allowed to get tampons, for instance. They could only get pads.
What, they think they're like dildos?
No, because they so fear of losing virginity and things like this. Like,
right.
Oh, wow. But so these narratives, they create fear. They establish a sense of threat. Sexuality becomes fear, and it becomes, a threat. And then if you have if you're young and you have kind of like advanced emotional intelligence, you'll kind of get stuck into that thinking in a sort of obsessive and sometimes compulsive ways, which a lot of these situations will sort of bleed over into anorexia and bulimia in some instances.
Whoa.
Oh, yes.
Whoa. See, that I never would have put those together.
Yes, they do. You do. I mean,
yeah. Can you go into that some more? How they bleed over? Like what that look like? Connecting the dots? Just for someone who may be going through, who is anorexic or bulimic. I know I used to struggle with bulimia. and back when I was younger. And it's so interesting because how these are fitting together.
Certainly, I'm more familiar with bulimia because I've had more clients who were sufferers of bulimia than anorexia. I'll
Right.
be honest with you. I am ill-equipped with anorexia. I didn't have the training, and
Mm.
it really overwhelms me. I mean, like it emotionally overwhelms me. I have yet to figure out why. But bulimia, I can work on it because I've had results. But any time,
Right.
and what I'm about to say is true of a lot of therapies. Yes, I'm not a sex therapist. But as a Frenchman, very comfortable with that question because I've spent years trying to resolve it for myself. I really find my way to allow my clients to really open up about their sexuality. And when we are trying to figure out trauma, it's always great when people are not concerned about my judgment or what I'm going to say when they enter that territory. Because
100%.
I mean, this is exactly the space for this. And
Right.
I mean, I'll give you examples. So this is going to be more of a hypothetical, and it's going to be a hybrid of some of my clients in the past. But it's very plausible what I'm about to say. It's a hypothetical that's plausible because it's merging all of these examples. Like,
Right.
so imagine that you have extremely religious parents, you know, who as part of their religion, there's a marked intention to question if same-sex relationships are, biological or lifestyle choice.
Right.
When you have these conversations happening at the table constantly, you know, and then as you listen to these conversations and you have love for your mom and your dad, but then you discover that, you prefer a male as a male, or you prefer a female as a female, or you have no preferences, but your body chemistry, your sexual urges, your desire to be with someone intimately are definitely outside of the norm that's being spoke at home. You know,
Right.
you get to a point where sometimes you will self-destruct. You will self-destruct.
Mhm.
You will disallow the feeding of the self, the nutrition of the self, as a punishment. For instance, you go kiss your boyfriend or kiss your girlfriend, and then you feel I mean, this has happened to one of my clients. You feel like you've done something shameful, and your next meal, you don't just cut. Your next meal, you will purge. It's a form of self-punishment. And then,
Right.
I mean, and then also, I mean, obviously you have also, the body shaming component, where, if first you have a parent who sexualizes your body, but also, shame your body, definitely bulimia will play a part in this.
See, this is where, yeah, sorry, this is where I'm putting it together for me. I saw my father, it's like one big puzzle. I saw my father going through, and I love you, Dad, but you would go through women like candy. There would be a new one that you were in love with every week. And, but the reason for breaking up with them would be her nose was too big. These kind of things. So I won't. So I'm watching this, and here it comes. Whew, it's in my nervous system. I'm watching this, and so when I would eat and I would see all the girls at school, so I would compare constantly with my brain, look at them, and I would fixate on them. I would watch the beautiful girls, and a little bit creepy, but I would be like, I was chunky and I was 5'9" at like seventh grade. It was crazy. And I would stare at them and I would be like, not, I wish them well. I'm glad they were beautiful. I always thought well of them. Like, but how do I get that? So that I could have love, right? Because so my dad will accept me.
Ah,
I wasn't thinking that, but as a child, like the survival is we need love, we need to survive. So I would purge, I would eat a lot, and then I would purge because I was like, I got my first boyfriend, and I was like, I'm not going to be good enough for him. I just ate, and I shouldn't have ate a hot dog with a Coke. Okay, purge. And then I felt good enough instantly. I was like, okay, I'll have my father's love. Everything's good. That wasn't in the forefront, but I know it's there. And, it's nuts. So spot on.
I mean, I mean, even overeating and sexuality have a link, you know? I mean, obviously, it's not always the case, but when people elaborate on their sexual apprehensions or their sexual discovery, you often find links. And I want to make it very clear, it's not always linked with the parents. You know, I mean, we're using our kids
Right.
as an example, you know, it's not always
Love
linked
you,
with
Mom and Dad.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But
Sometimes it's Uncle Tom. Just
my-
messing around.
like, yeah, I mean, there's not yet, but also I want, you know, the one thing that, I mean, we're discovering in this conversation certainly is the fact that, there has to be boundaries, you know, but they can't be full-fledged repression, because sometimes repression becomes oppression, you know. So
Yes.
there's some boundaries. Like, for instance, your dad, you know, if internally he was, you know, looking at women and choosing them on some physical attributes, good for him, as long as he doesn't talk about it. I mean, he does whatever he wants. You see what I mean? You know, and then
Right.
if you're a wise young kid, and who has early signs of good emotional intelligence, which you do, you're more likely to internalize that sort of thing. You really are. Like, all of my clients who were sufferers of bulimia have a very acute sense of meaning. Like, they pay attention to the meaning of things. They're very observational, and they're all very strong. I can do an emotional intelligence test with every single one of them. They are all emotionally intelligent, and then we can do kind of a retroactive assessment when they were younger to discover that they had emotional intelligence at a very early age. And that gets brutal. If you have zero emotional intelligence, let's just say, which is hypothetical, you just don't pay attention to the subtext and the details and then whatever people tell you. You just live your life, you know, and then you just don't get the interference of the opinion of others. You really don't.
Right.
But you did. You were analyzing these words. Like me, I was analyzing the whole concept of having a big penis and blah, 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 and the identity around these things. You were analyzing, you know, what is a good body? Like, because for me, like, maybe to please my father, I needed to be hung like a horse. And so for you to please your father, you had to reach a certain standard of beauty that was not possible. And also, frankly, we all need to have one or two things that are not perfect, because it makes us even more charming, you know? I mean, seriously.
Yeah. Well, that's wow, this is so much, because it's funny you say that. Like, I have a mole on my hip bone, and my kid was like, "Ew, gross, Mom, get that removed." And I'm like, "No." I was like, you need something that's it's character. Like, this idea of perfectionism is just not, it's drowning. And but it's beautiful how, what I love about you, Michel, is you make these people who the society could stereotype, like we do sex workers, we stereotype bulimics, we stereotype all these people. And you have just, for someone who struggled with bulimia in my high school years, you literally made me feel really good about being me. From what you said, I'm just going to put it plainly and be vulnerable. And I think that's a gift that you have to help all these people. So thank you for that. I just want to say that. Thanks for joining the Life in Red today, where we embrace passion, confidence, and positive sexuality. Keep painting your journey in bold red strokes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us so that you never miss out on living your best red life. Ready for more? Stay passionate, stay red. See you next episode.